Welcome to our crowdfunding site. My wife, Queen Mother, Dr. Rosalind Jeffries, and myself, Nana Kwekujua Ajman II of the Ogogo Stool in Asante. Thank you for joining us in what I'm sure you will appreciate is a great endeavor. At this site, you'll have a chance to make your contribution. It can be $20 on a regular basis, or it can be $5,000. But we have an objective to deal with the great legacy that we've been able to be a part of, and to make sure that that legacy is preserved, it is institutionalized and protected and passed on to future generations. In order to be able to do this, we have to have the support of the African family. And so we're asking you to look into your heart and also look into your resources to become a part of this. Africans operate around a value system that's spiritual, and I call it the 3C value system. Communal, we work together and live together. Cooperative, we are doing things collectively, and the collective process means that we share together. The 3 C's, I call it. There's no way, my wife and I, even though we put in the greater part of our life, most of our adult life, in uncovering and institutionalizing and spreading this enormous legacy of empowerment that our history represents. But in order for us to continue this work, we need the support of the family. And so again, we're looking for minimally $20, and that can be on a regular basis, and those who can help with thousands of dollars. Why? When I was full-time, for over these past 50 years, there was an income. There were resources. My wife similarly. But we're retired now. But the work still continues. And so we need the help. To do what? To preserve this enormous legacy of what I call the 50-year turning point of history. For me, 1945, when I was 8 years old, to 1995, is when African people began to move on the world stage and take control of their destiny, control of their economics, control of their politics, control of their culture, and began to systematize it into a process that could empower us, give us economic power, controlling what we produce, give us political power, manage our communities, and then dealing culturally. We are the mothers and fathers of the human family. And it's that record, that documentation, that we need to preserve, and we can't do it without you. Our ultimate goal is to raise $100,000 to make sure that the proper equipment is purchased and the proper treatment is taking place to preserve thousands of books, countless photos of the activities of our great people, the Alex Haleys of the world, the Dr. Shekanta Dieps of the world, the Dr. John Henry Clark, our great sisters, Dr. Betty Shabazz. And so in order for us to preserve this legacy, we have to digitize this material. Otherwise, it will be lost. And we have to collect it in such a way that it is not just a pile of materials, but it's materials that can be worked up into what we call a curriculum of inclusion. And we're now talking about a global curriculum of including the history of the world so that it can empower us. Education is power. And so we are asking for this support. In the immediate sense, our immediate target is $30,000. Because we now have, as a result of leaving the universities, storage of thousands of books and untold photos and slides and tapes and materials that cannot be replaced, and they have to be protected. Materials that would lead us and allow us to show you our relationship with the Emperor Haile Selassie from the 60s through the 70s, which show how we move with Dr. Clark around the world in Jamaica, in Brazil, in Africa, cementing ties with African leaders, will show us how we dealt with the current issues and the immediate concerns, such as the Million Man March, the participation with that great endeavor. So we want to be able to store the materials properly, but also have them protected and get a team of people and experts to make sure it can be disseminated. It can be put into a curriculum of the African world that can be used in Brazil because it will be translated in Portuguese. It will be used in Ivory Coast and in Senegal because it will be translated in French. It will be used in Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic and Colombia and Venezuela because it will be translated into Spanish. This means immediately we have to protect the materials. We have to get them out of storage. We have to make sure that we have a team of people who are experts into preserving, experts into how you move into the latest technology so that this material can be used for this enormous legacy that we've been a part of. Very few people, and certainly very few couples, have been blessed like we have to move together around the world. And my wife is a pioneer. She began the march in terms of African empowerment in 1960. She went to Nigeria before it was independent. She was working in the village in Nigeria, helping to build a schoolhouse. And then on that same program, 1961, I went to Ivory Coast. And then we met. And the rest is history. We bonded together with other couples and individuals and great leaders and our community to pull our story together. It is an empowerment the likes of which no one has experienced. It includes working as a brother with Alex Haley in producing Roots. Roots, the book, and Roots, the film. Working with a brother and a sister, Dick Gregory, and meeting him in 1969 at San Jose when I set up the Black Studies Department. And within months, he read us spiritually and asked us if we would take his oldest children, 8 and 11-year-old, Michelle and Lynn, to Africa with us. And it so happened we organized an Institute of the African World. 3 to 4 weeks in Black America, 3 to 4 weeks in Africa. A course credit institute moving from the Bay Area, San Francisco, San Jose, Oakland, down to Los Angeles, Watts, Compton, over to Texas, on to New Orleans, and then on to Jackson, Mississippi, and then going past Tuskegee Institute, on to Atlanta, up to North Carolina, Washington, D.C., and then on to New York. And then getting on a plane with this moving class through Paris, and at the airport, these 35 black people, including the Dick Gregory kids, including a lawyer in a wheelchair. We felt this powerful breeze coming toward us, and when we looked up, there she was, the great Josephine Baker, who could not pass 35 people with children at an airport without stopping. And then she wanted to know who the children were. I said, they're Dick Gregory. She said, oh my God, I met them when they were babies. And she hugged them. And then that same African Holy Ghost experience continued when we went on to Africa. And in the mountains of Guinea, where Stokely Carmichael had married a legend, Miriam Makeba. And we went to visit the mountains of Guinea where she lived. And I can still see her coming out from her 3-story hut with 5 rooms and red carpet and greeting us. And again, those children were a blessing because she said, who are these babies? I said, they're Dick Gregory and Lil's oldest children. She embraced them, remembering them when they were children. This is the type of experience that we were able to complete and make a part of our legacy. Kwame Ture, Stokely Carmichael, and Miriam Makeba, meeting them in Africa. Most recently, I just came back a few days ago from a week experience at the World Summit of Mayors, an idea that I helped initiate several years ago, We had an organization of African American mayors that included 3,800 of them, but at their conference in New Orleans, I held up a chart of the 20 largest African cities, and these had mayors. And I said, our goal is not just to link up Black America, but to link up the African world. And that has taken place. And over the last few years, we've had every 2 years, a summit. The first one was in Nigeria, in Oshogbo, in the western region. It was an enormous spiritual mission, but it was more than that. It was linking cities together. And most recently, after the second event was in Dakar, Senegal, where President Wade and the Senegalese leadership had pulled together the mayors in a summit, and we talked about how to link up water systems, how to deal with waste management, how to deal with planning our cities. And there is myself presenting Blueprint for Black Power by Dr. Amos Wilson to the President of Senegal. And at that time, we were also in Senegal for the dedication of the symbol of what we're all about. The monument conceived by the President of Senegal, encouraged by the President of Nigeria and the President of Tanzania and the President of Kenya and the President of South Africa, to produce a monument to represent where we are and what we need to do. And this is the rise of the Black man. Certainly the Black men, wherever they are, need to rise, and they need to do it as a family. And the Black man is leaning on and holding on to his rock, his wife, his partner for life. And he's holding up to the world the product of their great relationship, the child. And that child is not playing with his daddy. That child is pointing to the future. He's not pointing north to Europe, where we have been trained to look for sustenance. He's not pointing east to the new boys on the block, coming from China and from Japan and coming from India and Indonesia. He's not pointing southeast to Mecca. He's not even pointing south to the rest of the continent. That child is pointing across the Atlantic Ocean to Africans in the New World. It is the linkage of the African diaspora in America, in Central America, in the islands of the Caribbean, in South America, and certainly in Brazil. It is that linkage that will produce with the richest continent in the world the dynamic power for us to control our destiny in the future. And this statue, you can go inside, and there is the history of our people inside, from the beginning of humankind through the building of the great pyramidal civilizations of Egypt to the modern struggles for independence today. Inside. And then the thousands of school kids sit on the stairs that you see in this picture as we have the major activity. The conference in Dakar was special because it coordinated with the World Festival, in which, for the first time in 20 years, African scholars came together. They came from everywhere. And I was asked to take a major role by Dr. Jibril Diallo and others to bring these scholars together. Dr. Molefi Asante and others had worked with the President of Senegal in laying the foundation for the third World Festival. The first one was in Senegal in 1966. My wife and I attended that. The next one was in Nigeria in 1977, and I was able to attend that with Dr. Clark and other great scholars, Dr. Ronald Walters. And then the most recent one was in 2010, and that was the third edition. And part of that was the establishment and the initiation of the monument. And that monument represents the great work. Inside the monument is the museum and history of our people. Inside is the work of Dr. Cheikh Anta Diop, one of the greatest minds in the history of the world. And his great work, Civilization and Barbarism, is part of our legacy. In other words, Dr. Clark told me to go and make sure that I get this book, which was published in French in 1981, to get it translated in English. So I took a sabbatical leave to get the book translated. And luckily I was able to get help by a Congolese scholar, Brother Yalinge. But this is one of the greatest works by one of the greatest minds, Civilization and Barbarism. And so this is the basis for establishing, number one, the African origin of humankind, the African evolution of society, the African cradle of civilization. And we have to preserve that work. And in the back of it, you have the statement by Dr. Jeffries on the importance of the work of Cheikh Anta Diop. We are still working with his family in terms of legacy. And one of his major partners on the world scale was Dr. John Henry Clark. And he not only worked with Cheikh Anta Diop, but he worked with the scholars in Nigeria, the scholars in Kenya, scholars in the Caribbean, the scholars in Brazil. And he took on issues that were important. This is Dr. Clark, and his book is entitled Christopher Columbus and the African Holocaust, showing the rise, the relationship of capitalism to enslavement. And fortunately, I was able to do an introduction, a preface to this, along with Professor Scobie. But his masterwork, just as Diop's masterwork, we helped to get translated into English, and it took thousands of dollars to do that. Dr. Clark's masterwork is Notes for an African World Revolution, Africans at the Crossroads. And what he has outlined for us is that Lumumba was an important historical figure. And I had a chance to go to the Congo in 63 and 64 and again in 74. So I'm familiar with the Congo, but there's an unfinished revolution around the work of Lumumba. Kwame Nkrumah was the first of the modern leaders in Africa south of the Sahara to lead the nation to independence. And he had a vision of African greatness and the linking of the African nations on the continent together, as well as linking black people throughout the world together. His forte was understanding the Pan-African vision. And so his revolution is unfinished. And then, of course, in the 20s, and coming up from Jamaica was a visionary who saw the need for Africans to have their own state, to control their own culture and religion. And Marcus Garvey established his place in history. And of course, the parents of Malcolm X were Garveyites, and Malcolm X, in the early period of the 50s and 60s, laid down the struggle for us, our people. And these unfinished revolutions have changed our world. Africans now have nations and they're coming together. Africans now are developing their economics and their politics. And we have been blessed to have special relationships with these great historical figures. We are still working, as I speak, with their families. And we want to preserve their collective legacies with those of others that we know have made a great contribution. Dr. Shashi McIntyre, one of our ancestors, Professor Edward Scobie, and of course, those who we know, like Dr. Martin Luther King. That's a part of the legacy of myself, for example, coming up from Georgia, my father's side. The King legacy is a part of the Jeffries legacy. So our role is to help to coordinate the legacies of these great individuals to make sure that the story is not distorted. The story is not distilled so it doesn't have the power that it is. And so our work in raising monies through the crowdfunding process and through the lecture series that we are developing and also through the nonprofit process of a foundation, our work is part of our sacred mission to make sure that the story and glory of African peoples is a part of the development of our youngest as well as our elders. Well, certainly we need your support, and we are asking for it. And we want to thank you in advance for your contributions because we've been able to lay out for our people what we are about and get the support that we need. Our immediate target is 30,000, but we're projecting 100,000 in order to get the publications completed, in order to get the true story of the curriculum of inclusion as part of the education of the African world, in order to deal with the master's essay, the first of its kind at Columbia University, which was in the Senegal 4-year development plan, in order to understand nation building in Africa and how significant it is. This is the PhD dissertation, Subnational Politics in the Ivory Coast Republic. And interestingly enough, the World Conference of Mayors was supposed to be in the Ivory Coast this past week or so. But because of difficulties in the Ivory Coast, Ghana, Accra, accepted the role, and so they moved it right down the road, a couple hundred miles down West African coast to Abidjan, to Accra. Abidjan and Accra were our homes. We lived there when I was doing this work on nation building in Africa. And so now that these great cities have emerged, they are now being linked. And so we not only have the symbol of what we're all about with this type of understanding, but we have the scholars meeting in the World Forum in which 2,000 of the best minds of Africa were there, and we were able to organize those who came from America and the Caribbean, and they made a great contribution. And just this past week, I was able to come from the great conference in Accra, in which the mayors met again for the fourth time. And this is the meeting of some of the mayors. There were 2,000 people that attended the opening of this presentation. There were hundreds of mayors from around the continent of Africa, from America, from Central America, and from South America. The next conference of mayors will be 2 years hence, and it will be in Salvador, Bahia, and in Brazil. And the beautiful woman that you see in this picture here, the vice mayor of Salvador, Bahia, Cecilia Sacramento, she came to Ghana as she also came to Colombia, South America a couple of years ago when the other summit took place, and to make sure she got an understanding of what these summits are. So the next one will be in Salvador de Bahia. So cities are the poles of development of the countries. And you have to link the cities with the subnational smaller towns and whatnot. That's what I have been studying. So this work has been done by myself in a very personal way with over 100 trips to Africa and the Caribbean. And so in this imagery, you have the mayors of different African cities. Dr. Jibril Diallo, who is working with the UN AIDS, but he's also assisting the mayors in their organization. He has been working with the World Cup in terms of using athletics to deal with the question of AIDS. And Jibril and many of us have been family for many years. There's myself after I made a presentation at the World Summit. And that presentation was made with Dr. Julius Garvey, the youngest son of Marcus Garvey. And then in between us is one of the ministers from Ghana. She was a major presenter and was very excited to be with us. And the brother here, and there's his image of him. He is the mayor of Accra. He spent 20 years in South Carolina. He was a principal in Columbia, South Carolina. He understands the African experience in America plus the African experience at home. And he was asked to come to be the head of, to be the mayor of Ghana. And of course, our sister I just mentioned from Brazil, and this brother from South America is in charge of the global alliance that has been established to link us up. And so these are the reasons why we need to have preserved this enormous legacy. And so we are asking you to make your contributions. This is the mayor of Prairie View, Texas. And there he is after having made a fiery presentation of the importance of mayors. And these are the women that were part of the gathering. Some of them are market women, some of them are legislators. But the theme, one of the major themes of this year's conference was empowering women and children. And you're not going to get a better example of that than you have here. So these are the things that we will bring back to you, an analysis firsthand of what's going on in our world. And we will continue to do that. An example of what I'm referring to is this particular image. And this is one that includes my wife, which is the group meeting that met at the World Festival. And at that World Festival, the children who come to these activities sit on the stairs going up to the monument. And there's my wife, Dr. Rosalyn Jeffries, who shared all of this. Howard Dotson, who has been a major player in our world in terms of the Schomburg Center. And there you have a picture of the inside of the monument, where you have the exhibits of our history, etc. And next to me is Dr. Rosalynn Jeffries, but in back of her is Dr. Wade Nobles, who presented with his wife at the World Festival. He has a research institute in California, Oakland, California, that he's now passing on to his one of his sons. We're passing the tradition on through our people, but in order to maintain research institutes, in order to get this material digitized, in order to get it out for the world, we'll need your support. So you'll be doing dynamite important work by assisting us in doing these things that have to be done. We have to take control of our legacy. The question of sovereignty, the question of self-determination is at stake. The question of greater forces in the world organizing, and all of them looking to Africa as the source of power. The Chinese are organizing on a world scale, but they know the importance of Africa. The Middle Eastern nations are organizing on a world scale. They know the importance of Africa. And they are competing with Africans for control of the mother continent. And so we're talking about empowerment and making it work for our people. Well, we want you to be a part of this great endeavor. We want you to join us. You can join, in, as we mentioned before, a $20 donation on a continuous basis, or $1,000 or $5,000. It's necessary. This is just a capsule, a small view of the last few years of our great work. But this is work that has been carrying on for the last 60 years. And there are others like Dr. Ben and Dr. Clark who were involved 80 years. And we're all connected as a family revealing this enormous truth. You want to be a part of it. We want you to be a part of it. And it's going to take our collective resources. Why? So that we can continue to empower ourselves, destroy the slave mentality, liberate the African mind, understanding that the original peoples, the parent peoples of the planet are us, and only us can tell our story appropriately. So many people have tried to tell the story. It has been distorted. So many people have taken our history and made it their history. There's a stolen legacy. Our work, and it's sacred. Our work, and it's necessary. Our work, and it's part of what we have to do, is to preserve this legacy in the various forms that we can, so that we can nurture our children and their children and their children's children. This is not a one-shot deal. This is a great march into the future, a great and mighty walk. Dr. Clark and Dr. Ben were able to walk. Now we need a cyberspace superhighway into the future. And that's why we need your assistance. Thank you very much, brothers and sisters. This struggle continues, and we want you to be a part of it. And we want you to help us raise the necessary resources so that it will be a reality. A luta continua, the struggle continues.